Hey, it's Soleil, and this is episode 173 of the Orange Pill Investor. And today I want to talk about the MicroStrategy split and the potential to sell covered calls. But before that, I want to talk about not selling covered calls in MicroStrategy. So, need to state up front that if it would just completely break your heart to have your shares called away, uh, then maybe just turn off this video and walk away and go back to doing whatever you were doing, because that is a potential result. Now there are some ways to mitigate that risk, but and I will definitely talk about some of those ways to give yourself some insurance to make sure that your shares don't get called away. But it definitely is a risk. I need to put like a poll or one of those, did you read all of the warnings on this label before proceeding or something on this video, just to make sure people read the fine print. So this strategy absolutely limits your upside. So if that already is not your cup of tea, then this, is not necessarily for you. However, if owning MicroStrategy is either a temporary thing or you don't mind limiting your upside, or at some point, if, we'll have to split adjust it. But if MicroStrategy gets to 10K, so I guess it would be 1K, and, middle of 2025 somewhere, and you don't want to get rid of those shares, but you think maybe the bull market is over, and you want to collect some premium, a kind of a yield on those shares, then selling covered calls is something that you could do to give yourself a little bit of downside protection. So those two warnings need to be stated up front, that your shares could get called away, which means you would be forced to sell them, and also there is a risk of not capturing maximum upside. And I've already read some of the comments, and so big shout out to big shout out to Punter Jeff for tagging me, and it basically basically decided what this video was going to be about today. I'm getting like notification after notification, and my follower count probably just jumped up at least 10-15% in a day, which fittingly enough can happen to MicroStrategy at any time. So without further ado, if you have at least 10 shares now, come August, those shares will be multiplied out to 100. And in order to sell a covered call, you have to own 100 shares. I'm not going to get into the synthetic form, the poor man's covered call. It was a little bit even more risky than what we're already talking about. So if you own 100 shares of your stock, you can use those 100 shares as collateral to sell a covered call. And before we talk about selling them, we should probably talk about what it means to buy one. So the buyer of a call option is buying the right, but not the obligation, to force the seller to sell them their shares at the agreed upon strike price. So, for example, this is not something that I'm necessarily recommending, but if someone bought this covered call at the 1340 strike, whoever sold it could be forced, if the buyer exercises, the seller could be forced to sell 100 shares of MicroStrategy to the buyer at 1340. The only reason he would buy this call would be because he thinks by end of tomorrow, by this expiration date, the price of MicroStrategy will be $3,350 more than its current price. That's why the break-even price right here is $1373.50. It's this price plus this price. Now the seller, which is me, If you are of a mind that you've held MicroStrategy long enough, or you just want to collect some premium and you are not going to, it's not going to make you lose any sleep to sell these shares of MicroStrategy, then I might sell this 1400 strike covered call. I'd get paid $975. And then if the price of MicroStrategy goes up from 1341 to 1400, then this guy would say, okay, cool. The price is 1450. I'm going to make the seller sell me his shares at 1400. Then now he's got shares that are worth 1450, and he basically profits $5,000. Now the seller would make the money from 1341 up to 1400, and then they'd also be able to keep this premium. So selling covered calls is not necessarily supposed to give you maximum upside or be the most profitable strategy. That it would probably be just hodling, owning your shares and sitting on your hands and doing nothing. However, the reason you would do this is if you did want to collect a yield, or if you knew you're just going to sell at 1400 anyway. If you put in a limit order for 1400, who knows how long you'll have to wait for it to get there. But the buyer of the covered call will pay you this premium on top of what you were already going to make. So if MicroStrategy pumps to like $2,000 and you're like, oh, hey, you know what? If this gets to 2,500, I'm out. I'm just out of here. I want to walk away. Then you could sell the covered calls at the 2,500 strike, get paid some yield here, gets paid some premium until MicroStrategy pumps to that price. And then you would be forced to sell at that price, similarly to a limit sell order, but you'd be getting paid this premium all along the way. And it's funny with these stock splits, sometimes the market goes crazy. Often the price will pump on that news as people just they just want to get in on it before the split, even though the split does absolutely nothing except, I guess, make it more affordable for people. But I mean, a lot of these exchanges have fractional shares anyway. I mean, my 5K account on Robinhood has fractional shares. I basically use MicroStrategy as my store of value. Every time I earn premium, when I sell a covered call, I just buy a fraction of MicroStrategy with it. And so on this account, I have 1.02 shares. And then when MicroStrategy pumps to $2,000 or 2,500 or whatever, I'll sell this and then I'll buy 100 shares of whatever, CLSK, Riot, Hut, any of these guys, whichever one's probably the cheapest. So I'm a little bit nervous now because I am kind of expecting a pump. So I don't want to sell myself short by choosing a strike price that's too low and then my shares get called away too cheap. So I'm tempted to even do something that I almost never do, which is not sell a covered call and wait for that pump. And the reason is this. Let's just take a look at MicroStrategy's chart. So when MicroStrategy was down here at 500, 700, I think I had 300 shares. And when the price was around here at price was probably around here at 1,000 or 1,200. And I sold the 1,400 strikes. I had built in about 20% call-away value in there. And the price went to 1,700 by expiration. That means that I either had to let those shares be called away at 1,400, which was a decent profit for me, which was fine. Or if I wanted to keep those shares, I would have to pay the difference. And the difference between 1400 and 1700 is 300. And of course, options are in increments of 100. So that was actually closer to like 30, 35 grand I had to pay in order to not lose those. So again, if you if you have any qualms whatsoever about your shares being called away, you got to find something else to do. You can just, just hodl. But generally what I do is when I collect premium, and last week I sold, not these, I sold the 1400 strikes, which by a miracle, the price of MicroStrategy is pretty much lining up perfectly to my strike price, which is like, that never happens. So don't think that this is a routine occurrence. But I got paid $1,200 for each of the contracts, and I think the price of MicroStrategy was about $12.20 when I sold it. So I was able to capture all of the price appreciation from MicroStrategy from 1220 up to this 1400, since it's still under 1400, and plus I got paid the $1,200. So if the price holds tomorrow, I'll probably be able to buy these for fairly cheap, pocket the difference, and then I'll be able to choose new strikes next week. And I may just bag hold on one of these 100 shares. I may do my normal procedure on one set of 100 shares, and then maybe just let the other 100 shares ride. I kind of don't have to, because I have some insurance here that I've been stacking up. So after selling, covered calls for 10 weeks, and this $1,200 times 2 times 10 weeks, that's like 24 grand. You can take that premium and do whatever you want with it. But what I have started doing is you can buy additional shares with it, or I've started buying these leaps. And these are basically leveraged plays. And this is extremely risky, which you can see by the trade price that I paid was 5 grand for both of these, and it's worth half that. So shares are one delta, meaning if the price of the stock goes up $1, your account's going to go up $1. But long call options are a little different. If the price goes up $1, you're only going to get whatever this delta value is. But at the same token, if the price of MicroStrategy falls, your option price is going to fall by that delta amount for every dollar that the price falls. And I think MicroStrategy probably only has fallen by about 10% since I bought these, and you can see the value is cut in half. So a 10% drop in MicroStrategy's price cost just catastrophic, losses to these long call options. But that is a price that I was willing to pay to basically provide upside insurance for these strikes, because of that incident where I had the 1400 strikes and the price went to 1700. I wanted these to be able to pump along with the price, and then I could I can sell these to pay for rolling. All right, so there's two I think fairly common and well accepted methods for selling covered calls. The one that I employ most of the time, that MicroStrategy is actually making me a little bit nervous about, is selling weeklies. So tomorrow this will say 7 days. But I would generally try to collect about 20% call away value. And on a 1400 stock, that's about $280. So if I had 280 to the current price of 1400, that's 1680. So I would try to go up here to around the 1680 and see what I could collect. And generally, I try to collect about 1%, but you can see that that is actually not quite available here. So I may slide my strikes down to around here, and that's about 200, a little over 200 in call away value. So I would profit up to this strike. If the price of MicroStrategy goes to like 2,000, I would only profit to the strike that I selected here. So again, be very be very careful at the strike you select, because that is the strike that the buyer can make you sell them your shares to them at. So I would probably end up going right around here. Maybe the 1550, nice round number. A lot of times there's a lot of more open interest and volume at increments of, increments of 100 or increments of 50. So that would be weekly, and I would just sell one week after week, pocketing this until my shares got called away. And you can see this chance of profit here is about 88%. That means about 12% of the time you should expect this to go above your strike. And you should expect 1 out of every 10 trades approximately to be faced with that dilemma of, do I want my shares called away? So this is not just free money. There is a trade-off. Absolutely. There are always trade-offs. But if you knew you were going to sell at 1550 anyway, you can just sell this covered call. And if the price goes above 1550, then you get the price you wanted, plus you get to pocket this extra 1,200 bucks. Or if the price of MicroStrategy just trades horizontally for the next 2 months, then you can just collect this 1,200 bucks every week. That's method number one. Method number two is basically like the tasty trade method. They did a bunch of research and they showed that for out of the money options, like if you're going to go up here to like the 80% chance of profit, 80, 84, theta, which is the Greek that regulates how much value an option call depreciates every day, this number accelerates maximally at around 45 days to expiration. So the other method would be going out here, maybe to the 1600 strike. You could sell this covered call for 8,500. And then you would probably try to manage this option every 2 to 3 weeks. And you're going to cross your fingers and hope that you can collect about half of it. You're not going to try to collect this whole 8,500 because you'd have to wait the whole 45 days. But if you can collect half of this in 2 to 3 weeks, then you can just roll it. You can pay to close and then roll it out to another 45 days. You can see it's a little bit easier to build some extra call away value in and still collect a decent amount of premium. If you collected half of this, that would be about 4,200 in 2 weeks, which would be about 2,600 a week. So this is even being a little bit more greedy. You could even build even more call away value in here. If you wanted to collect 1% a week, that would be about 14, double it, 28, double it again to 56. So you could go to about the 1750 strike, collect 5,600 bucks. Then in 2 weeks, if you can manage it and buy it back for 2,800, you would pocket the other 2,800, which would be 1,400 per week. And then if the price of MicroStrategy does rip to $2,000, then you just sit and wait for the shares to get called away. But there's a guy that I follow, Coach Mac, and he likes to recommend waiting and picking your moments for when to sell a covered call against something, or to whether to sell a cash secured put. And so what he would do potentially, if I understand the way that he presents his scenario, is if he owns MicroStrategy for 700, he might wait for this pump. He might wait for it to go to 1,000 or 1,400. Then he would sell his covered call for maybe 1,700. And then hope, so you're going to capture all of this upside before you start selling your covered calls. And then you're more likely to time your covered calls with the top. Whereas I sold, when the price was 1,200, and I sold the 1,400 strike, and I kind of got punked because the price went to 1,700. He would probably watch the stock appreciate before he sold his covered call. Now, he's not collecting premium. He might not be collecting premium here, January, February. He might just be, basically bag holding is what it's called, until this spikes. Or if he wanted to sell a cash secured put, he would wait for it to drop from $2,000 to 1,200 or whatever. Then he might start selling cash secured puts. I may adopt a little bit of that strategy, which I normally do not do it. But with this bullish news on this stock split, it just seems like people lose their minds, and they have this they're just irrationally drawn to stock splits. And so if the price pumps, I want to capture as much of that upside as possible. So I may switch it up and go out to this 45 days. The other thing about 45 days to expiration, in the Tasty Trade videos that I used to watch religiously, they called it giving yourself time to be right. So when I sell these weeklies, I'm just capturing premium after premium after premium, but I'm also tempting fate, because as soon as the price spikes, there's only a week to kind of hope that the price, I never hope that the price goes back down, but a lot of times you just like, I don't want it to breach my strikes, because I don't want to have to deal with paying to roll it. But when you choose a 45 days to expiration, if the price pumps, like say I did pick at 1750, thinking, I'm being pretty conservative here. But still, you see that there's still a 15% chance that MicroStrategy will breach this strike by this date. So it's definitely not like a easy button. This'll, I can choose something way up here and it'll never happen. It will happen eventually. But if the price goes to 2,000 by tomorrow, then there's still another 40 days left where the price might drop back down below the 1750, and then you don't have to worry about paying to roll your call. I generally don't do this because I've been doing it since 2020, and I'm just kind of used to having to pay to roll sometimes. It doesn't really bother me. But I know some of the new option sellers, it can kind of freak them out. Like every time the price of a stock starts to threaten their strikes, they get in their feelings. And for good reason. Owning MicroStrategy is practically a religion at this point. So many of us are irresponsibly long. And this strategy kind of just doesn't even make sense to a lot of people. They're like, no way in hell I'm even risking losing any of my shares, and until like the final pump sometime in 2025, which, if you're a believer in the Bitcoin for your cycles, might be when Bitcoin is kind of peaking sometime in 2025, if the cycles hold. And of course, I guess I gotta say, no, not financial advice, all the disclaimer crap. The other thing is, and this is not tax advice either, but every time you take these profits, you're gonna This is all going to be short-term capital gains taxes, as far as I know. So that's another consideration. But if MicroStrategy ever reaches a point where you're like, you know what, I've done everything I came here to do, and I want to collect some yield on this, you can absolutely do this. And come August, it's going to be much more affordable. Now, the other thing, and this is one thing that I'm really kind of stoked about, is these long call options that I bought. I was only able to really just convince myself to afford these. They're not even technically leaps. Sometimes I call them leaps, but they kind of don't even really qualify as leaps until they're a year out. So they finally, MicroStrategy dropped down to around 1200 ish, and I was finally able to afford some of these 225-day long calls. But I'm really stoked for these. The farthest DTE that's available are these 2-year ones. And really, if I'm expecting MicroStrategy to pump all through 2025, I kind of only have to go to the January 16th ones. But even these are crazy expensive, $23,000. So once the 10-to-1 split happens, these are only going to cost $2,000. Whoops, not sell. These are going to cost $2,300 a pop. So these are going to be much easier to buy and then kind of dollar cost average into. So I'm totally excited for that. And then if the price, if the price does go to something like a 10K by the end of 2025, these things will be nuts. The returns on these will be insane. So, that's generally what I do with the profits. So I don't just, everything that I sell, I I I buy more assets that are long. So I'm selling short in the short term, but then I'm buying long term assets for the long haul. And really, the trade off for this is it's almost kind of like it is a kind of almost a strategy for every stock, but MicroStrategy and maybe Tesla, because the whole point is to reduce your cost basis. Every time you sell a covered call, you're reducing your cost basis. If I buy 100 shares of MicroStrategy right now, I pay the 135 grand, and then if I sell the 1400 strike and I pocket this 4 grand, now I've lowered my cost basis from 1360 down 40 to 1320. So for the average investor that sucks at picking stocks, reducing your cost basis gives you a higher chance of success. Now, for most of us in the irresponsibly long MicroStrategy community, we're so bullish on MicroStrategy that we can't even fathom a scenario where MicroStrategy doesn't 5x by next year, unless like Michael Saylor steps in front of a bus or some other kind of crazy black swan. So in that sense, covered calls may not even be, may not even serve their purpose, because the purpose is to give yourself a higher chance of success by reducing your cost basis. The trade-off, of course, which I already mentioned, is sacrificing maximum upside. So if you kind of feel like MicroStrategy is a as close to a sure thing as the stock market offers, then maybe that's another reason why the strategy, isn't for you, or whether you want to adopt that kind of modified strategy of, okay, MicroStrategy is 800 here. I'll start selling covered calls after it doubles or triples. Maybe that's a good policy to have. Something along those lines. All right. I think that covers all of the basics. And I hope I have been sufficiently cautious uh, and explained all the risks. But, oh, actually, sorry. So the risks. So it's not guaranteed, but if, like what happened to me, if you think, you know what, I'm going to build 20% call away value in, but it could go up another 20, 30%. And if you don't want your um, shares called away, you can kind of estimate how much insurance or how much protection you'd need. So in my case, I had the 1400 strikes. And if I thought, you know what, the price could go to 1700, then that's $300 times 100 shares. So that means I got to come up with $30,000 of insurance. Now, if the price is 1700 divided by 1700, that means you would have to carry, in addition to your 100 shares that you're using as collateral, you would need to carry an additional 17 shares that you could sell at 1700 to pay the 30 grand to roll. If you think the price, if you're going to do the 1400 strike and you think the price could go to 2000, so now you need 600 times 100. You need 60 grand divided by a price of $2,000 a share. You need 30 shares. So you can kind of try to save yourself, but even if you have these 30 shares, if you miscalculate and the price goes to 2,500 or 3,000, you're still screwed, and your shares are getting called away, or else you're going to have to pay some serious money to roll. But so this, when I say 30 shares, you can just buy the shares straight up, or one share is equivalent to one delta. So these leaps that I bought, these two leaps added together, this is Tasty Trade. So the weighting of these two leaps together is 17 delta. That means I would need 4 of these November 15th, 3,800 strikes, long calls. That would give me 34 delta. That would give me the same insurance as 30 shares. And 30 shares times the current price of 1,400 will cost 42 grand. But 4 of these leaps right now is only going to cost you 12 grand. So buying these long calls lets you buy the insurance, the upside insurance, much cheaper. But as you can see, when the price goes down, the value of this insurance policy plummets. So buying long calls is probably the riskiest option play in the stock market, and it's generally what people admit, like, oh, I sold options but I got wrecked, or no, excuse me, I used to trade options and I got wrecked. Oh, well, what did you trade? Oh, I bought 5-day expiration calls and you tried to YOLO. It's always somebody who bought calls and puts that gets wrecked. I generally try to keep long calls to under 10% of my portfolio. I think I have exceeded that because I was just dollar cost averaging these damn things, and it's probably like 20% right now. So that's starting to make me a little bit uncomfortable. Um, but yeah, these are going to get much more affordable. So just keep that in mind. You know, play these scenarios out in your head like, okay, I don't want my shares called away. How many extra shares do I need if the price goes to XYZ? And just go to your little calculator, you know, figure out the difference between your strike price and where you think the price could go, figure out how much it would cost to roll, then figure out how many shares you need at that price in order to prevent your shares from getting called away. Or see how many deltas you need. And then when you go to the option chain, if I'm going way out here to January 16th, the delta, yeah, the delta on this 3800 strike is already 0.37. So I might only need one of these, only, they're 23 grand a pop. I might only need one of these to ensure 100 shares of MicroStrategy up to around, what did I say? Like 2000 or something. Which is still half price compared to the 42 grand it was going to cost to buy 30 shares at the current price. So those are the ways you can mitigate risk. You can wait for the pumps, then sell covered calls up here, you know, somewhere. You can buy extra shares to cover the cost of rolling. You can buy some long calls to cover the cost of rolling. Or if you just can't sleep at night with the thought of your MicroStrategy shares getting called away, then just don't do it. And if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching. And another big shout out to Punter Jeff. And congrats to all the MicroStrategy holders that are on the receiving end of the next pump. All right, be good, y'all.